If I Should Die by Donevy Westphal. Available through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other retailers.
Chuck has it set up. How about if you and Matt come over for a visit? That would be more like it, Mrs. McDonald said. So, is this one of your boys? Charlie asked. Charlie, this is Mr. Julius C. Armstrong. He's doing a story on small towns, and he's looking for some local color. Local color? Charlie's face lit up. Turn your machine on there and get this one. He waited until Julius had everything set up, then told his story. About 60 years ago, when I was still a feisty young man, me and Pat, that's Pat O'Brien for the record, we helped old man Williamson move his outhouse. Charlie paused and rubbed his chin. His audience already knew the story, and most of them were wearing smirks. How good of you, Charlie. His story caught Mrs. McDonald's interest. When I was growing up, some people in our neighborhood moved theirs every few years. Well, Mr. Williamson took exception to our generous help. It was about 12 midnight, and he happened to be sitting in it. Too late, Mrs. McDonald saw it coming. Charlie, you old unrepentant sinner, she gasped in mock horror. I'm going to go get the cake and coffee set out, Julius. You'll have to take care of this fellow. He's probably got more local color than you have recorder. She walked to the counter and began cutting the cake and sliding it into plates. You have such good-looking children, the twins Bertha and Bernice exclaimed as the snapshots were passed around. This picture here, Bernice held up a picture of Ruth. This is Pat's granddaughter, isn't it? She looks so much like him. Two older women whispered together and laughed. Bertha continued where her sister left off. Such a delightfully handsome man. Bernice and I tried everything. Well, not quite everything. She blinked and fluffed up the collar on her dress. But everything within decent bounds to get his attention. The women both sighed. Julius smiled, remembering Mrs. Irving's remarks about female antics. Then he married Prissy. Their faces drew to a pout. Remember the time of that? Bernice said. That epidemic? Bertha finished the thought. Prissy came in and nursed half of the town through it. She was worn out. It's no wonder she got sick herself. Was that when they lost their baby girl? Bernice asked. No, they lost little Rose the year before. Bertha stopped speaking. They turned and glared at Ralph Meacham. Enough, it's too sweet, Ralph Meacham said after chasing every crumb of his second piece of cake. And the coffee's too salty. He drained the last of his third refill. As he sat alone at the end of the table, scowling and ill-tempered. No, I don't want to see those photos. He pushed them away. Especially not O'Brien's granddaughter. Too much O'Brien. Bah! He rose with haste and shuffled down the hall to his room. One overall strap hung behind, and a red farmer hanky dangled halfway out of his back pocket. It's been good talking to you. Julius packed up his recorder, beside where Charlie relaxed, finishing his coffee. Mrs. McDonald busied herself chatting with Sheila and picking up her belongings. The steel-gray-haired man smiled up at him. The McDonald family are good folks. Amanda's got spunk. Her affliction may slow her down, but not much. Her husband must be quite a fellow, too, Julius said. He sure is. There are 2 peas in a pod, Charlie said, handing Sheila his plate and cup. You going home soon, then? Julius asked. Yeah, yes, I am. Tomorrow, to be exact, Charlie said. I met an old fellow about your age a few days ago. Did you ever know of someone by the name of Hiram McCormick? He'd been tall, maybe a red-haired, well-built fellow. No, never knew any McCormicks around here. I know a couple of fellows would fit the description, but not by that name, Charlie shook his head. Ready, Julius? Mrs. McDonald called from the doorway. Sure am, he shook hands with Charlie. Glad to make your acquaintance, sir. Maybe I'll see you around since you're going home. You never know, Charlie said with a nod. Us old codgers show up in strange places and at odd times. Here, I'll let you have the box with the cake crumbs, Mrs. McDonald laughed as Julius opened the car door and she slid into the passenger side. Julius dropped into the driver's seat, cranked the starter, and backed his car around. Charlie sure is full of stories, isn't he? Julius said with a chuckle. He sure is. Quite the contrast to Mr. Meacham. It's sad how many people are like Ralph Meacham. God sends so many blessings on everyone, but they get so wrapped up with everyday living that they don't even stop to say thank you. Ingratitude is such a horrible sin. Ingratitude. I'd never thought about it. Julius waited at the stop sign while a pickup passed. The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, and ingratitude is the root of evil also. Mrs. McDonald frowned and fingered the handle on her purse. We all should be grateful, but we want to do it our way. Or we just want to do what we want to do, regardless of the consequences to ourselves or to others. We think everything should be democratic, like we should get to vote on things, or why do we think God needs our opinion? How absurd, how absolutely blasphemous. She shook her head. That's a different way of looking at it, Julia said, relieved they were back to the garage. He switched off the engine. I'm going to be out and about for a few hours. You need to be careful, Mrs. McDonald's face puckered into a doubtful look. I know those fellows are long gone, but... She hesitated, then clamped her mouth into a thin line and let the subject drop. You have your job to do and don't need an old woman telling you something. I've got some things to do to prepare for supper. I'm rather surprised Ruth isn't home now, but when she gets back, I'm going to take a short nap. Mrs. McDonald spoke over her shoulder as she climbed out of the passenger seat and retrieved her articles. Here, let me get those. You don't need to be so stubborn and independent. His tone carried a light-hearted note, but his face wore a frown. I'm surprised at you, young man. Of course I have to be stubborn and independent. It's who I am, and let me tell you. Her face relaxed into a smile. Go ahead, get my stuff. I'm just teasing. But don't frown, it'll give you bad wrinkles. And close your mouth. Julia self-consciously closed his mouth and smiled. You are the most cantankerous person I know. Can't be true, but maybe pretty close, she laughed as she walked toward the breezeway. If you want to take a bottle of water with you, we have some insulated containers. It'll snap on your belt. I'll set this stuff on the counter before I go get the rest of my gear. Some water would be handy. I'll get it ready. She put her purse on the counter beside the cake container. Thanks, I'd appreciate it. Silently, Julius took the stairs to his room, 2 at a time. He dropped into a crouch and shoved open the door. Scanning the interior of the room, everything looked normal, still cautious. He checked out the bathroom. Assured that all was clear, he pulled out his carry bag, checked through the items, snapped it shut, and headed for the door and for his afternoon assignment. I know we have more bottles, but couldn't find but one container. Will this do? Mrs. McDonald heard him enter the kitchen and indicated an insulated bottle sitting on the counter. That'll be fine, ma'am. I'll see you in a few hours. Julius picked his camera from the counter, and the insulated pink bottle with the picture of a little pony on the front hurried out the door. Bad guys better watch out. I'm armed and dangerous. He rolled his eyes at the thought. Wouldn't do any good to worry Mrs. McDonald. Of course, being blind, she wouldn't know, but a pink pony? Julius scouted around, taking a circuitous route to the back of the property. As he worked his way through the trees that bordered the pasture and the road, he stopped to listen. Only nature sounds filled the air. Still wary, he checked the length of the road both ways with the scope and paused for several minutes. An overgrown grove of trees enveloped the property, the empty O'Brien farmhouse on 3 sides. He quickly slipped out of the cover of the trees across the gravel road and into the safety of the O'Brien grove of trees. With stealthy tread, he moved through the underbrush until he reached the overgrown driveway in from the grade B or dirt road. The telephone service truck was parked on the north side of the O'Brien property, concealed off the dirt road on the overgrown lane in the grove of trees. His right hand checked his weapon. He released the safety. Those yahoos the other day had been watching Earl and Stu. They could be waiting now. Ever vigilant, he scouted around. From behind a nearby tree, Julius inspected the truck. He stood close enough. After a short time, he slipped across a few steps to the back. With a prayer, he opened the service doors and stepped up and inside.